Hi there, esteemed audience, and welcome to another episode of Middle Grade Ninja. I'm your host, Rob Kent. As you know, I'm the author of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, Banneker Bones and the Alligator People, and Banneker Bones and the Cyborg Conspiracy. It's a wonderful trilogy. You're going to enjoy it all. Join two 11-year-old detectives as they race around on jetpacks after the Giant Robot Bees. If you're curious about that, you can get that first book as a paperback, an audiobook, but you can download Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees for free as an ebook whenever you're watching or listening to this, wherever fine ebooks are sold. So get yourself a copy. I know that you're probably still in quarantine for COVID-19. You've got time. Give it a read. You'll have fun. Under the super secret pen name Robert Kent, I've written books for older readers, such as my young adult novel, Altogether Now, a Zombie Story, and its companion piece, right now, a short story, and then the Book of David, which is a 5-volume serial horror novel. That one's about an atheist who purchases a haunted house that then begins to give him religious visions. It is nuts. If you're curious about that, you can check out the Book of David, Chapter 1 by Robert Kent, not Rob Kent, as an ebook for free, also available as a paperback. Or if you don't like to read things, you like to listen, and you're listening to a podcast, that makes sense. For God's sake, go back 5-6 episodes. I don't know how many episodes ago. You can hear me read the Book of David, Chapter 1 to you for free. Just something I did to keep from going stir crazy here in COVID-19. Recorded my own audiobook. Bucket list item checked off. Next bucket list item, please. And as always, head to middlegradeninja.com. Read interviews with hundreds of literary agents, editors, authors, folks you'd find interesting, and get the entire back catalog of the show, as well as find out who's coming up next. All kinds of great stuff at middlegradeninja.com. That's the longest intro ever. Tracy Wolff, I apologize. I promised to keep it to about 2 minutes. I think I went 2.5. Dreadful. How are you this evening?
I'm really good. How are you doing this evening?
I am fantastic. We've just had Tostitos here for dinner, so that's a wonderful evening.
That works. Thank you so much for having me on your show. I love it, and I love your bookshelves behind you. They're amazing.
You know what? This is just a small sampling. I've got the 3 behind me, and then I've got 3 over there. I think there's 3 in my wife's office, at least 2 in my son's room, 2 in our bedroom. We got books everywhere. That's
I know, right? When we were early on in my marriage, we were moving a lot because we were doing grad schools and all of those different things. And so my husband's friends would come over and help us move. And they'd move the furniture, they'd move the baby stuff, no problem, because we had my oldest at that point. And then they would get to the box after box after box after box of books. And they would be like, what is in these things? And my husband would be like, yeah, I mean, what do you want me to say? She can't go anywhere without them. What are we going to do? I think it's just perils of being a writer, right?
How many shelves? Do you know how many bookshelves you've got right now?
In my house, you got to let me count like you did. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 18.
You win. That's amazing.
We have more people in the house. And my younger 2 are more graphic novel readers, and that because both of my younger 2 sons have dyslexia, but my oldest son has read. We only have 2 bookshelves in his room, and yet he probably needs 4 more. So there's books under the bed, books in the closet, books piled on top of books in the closet. So yeah, big readers.
Is that a future author, you think, or just a reading enthusiast?
I actually think he's just a reading enthusiast. He is my science guy. But I actually think my youngest son is the most fantastic storyteller I've actually ever run into. And he is always has really good ideas. Like he'll say something and I'll be like, you know what? And I'll mention it to my agent. My agent will be like, wow, that's a great idea. I mean, we're not necessarily the same kind of writers. So it's not an idea for me. I'm like, but you should, I keep telling him he needs to. He's 13. I keep telling him he needs to start because he's just always has been from the time he was, that high. Just been a brilliant storyteller. And yeah, so we'll see what happens.
Yes, if only he knew someone in the industry who could help him get started.
That's what I tell him all the time. That's what I tell him. I will see. Mom. He's 13.
Not handy. Not that dyslexia is handy, but if you're going to have dyslexia, to have a mom who's both an author, a former English professor, you could do a lot worse in this world. That's
That's what I try to tell him, but yeah, he has no interest in he's like I said, he's 13. Everything I have to say is like stupid.
Sure.
So he's the only one of my three who's been like that though. So we'll see. He's awesome.
It's not commentary on Fortnite. Get out of here.
Right, exactly, pretty much. Or Dungeons and Dragons. That's the big thing in my house at the moment is D&D. Has been for a couple of years now.
You all play it together, or?
I am not a big D&D player, but my two sons have a little cadre of, I guess there's 7 of them now, and they meet twice a week and play, and they run two different DMs, so they run 2 different stories, one on Fridays and one on Sundays.
So are they big fantasy readers?
I think so. I think they're, yeah.
I'm just wondering if you can, when quarantine is lifted and you're back out and about in the world, if you can go and introduce them to fantasy authors. I mean, you must know some writing paranormal romance, yeah?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. These are my 2 who are less readers because of the thing, but they love to meet. Yeah, I have a lot of friends who write paranormal and fantasy. I'm one of the few who doesn't write full-on fantasy. Mine's more like I like urban fantasy. That's my thing. I set it in the real world, instead of high fantasy. But I have, yeah, they love meeting authors. In fact, one of my oldest son's greatest triumphs was, I'm trying to remember how many years ago it was. It was probably 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago at this point. But I was at a conference in New York, and my agent had invited me to go to dinner. An editor had invited her to come to dinner and said, "Hey, why don't you bring one of your authors?" And so she'd asked me to come with her. And we went to dinner, and it turns out that she is one of George R.R. Martin's editors.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, okay, so look, I have a giant favor to ask of you. And Adam got, and that's my oldest son, got all of the George R.R. Martin books signed. And that was pretty awesome. Personalized and signed. So it was pretty awesome. I was like the coolest mom ever.
Incredible.
Yeah, like this huge package came. It took like 6 months. And I was certain that she had forgotten. And then this giant package came, and they were all the books. He still has them right on his bookshelf.
That had to be just a heck of a temptation for the editor, who of course we know editors are noble and always do the right things. But if it were me and I'm looking at what the rates are on eBay versus sending those books on to
right? Right? Yeah. Good point.
Bring us George R. R. Martin. I just wanted to see if they got the books. Did they like it? Yeah, they loved them, George. All right, well, when you're breaking up, you must be going on a tunnel. Bye.
Exactly. But yeah, it was. I think one of the coolest presents certainly that he's ever gotten in his life. He loved it. So yay.
So you won momming that day for sure.
I did. It's always nice, right? When you win every parenting, you're like, yeah, my mom's cool.
That's what gets me. Mine's 6. He mostly thinks I'm great. But I play a game where I have great parenting days and pretty good parenting days. And like parenting days where it could have been worse.
You know what? It's called good enough parenting. I was told that by a therapist once. It's you know what? You're good enough. Even on your bad days, you're good enough, because most of the time you're pretty kick butt, So good enough parenting. That's what we call it. Everybody's fed, everybody's happy, everybody's, doing okay and healthy and all of that, There are worse days.
That's
better. Could happen than that.
Parenting than like entire generations of humans.
Right? That's what I said. If those are your bad days, it's good enough parenting. Like, that makes sense.
So Tracy Wolff, author of more than 60 books?
I'm working on my 66th right now, the sequel to Crave, yeah.
Wow. Does it get easier by 66, or is it still the hard thing?
You would think yes. I think some books have been easier than others. I think some books have been really, really hard. Some books just flow easier. But no, I don't know that it ever gets easier, because I have a really crappy process. And yes, the process is rough. But
I was reading about this. If you wouldn't mind sharing, what is your process for esteemed audience?
So I tend to write books really, really fast. But it's one of those ones where, well, you know, like when you have a book in your head, it's usually in your head a while before you sit down to write it. You know what I mean? So I tend to, I think about the idea, and then one of my favorite parts of writing is actually, my friends tease me all the time. It's the sale, right? Like I put it down, I sell the book, and then I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm done now. And the editor tends to be like, yeah, no, you're not, because I would actually like the book. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that pesky part. Okay.
I already got the money. There was no problem there. So.
Like, I already told the story. Like, I told you the story. I know what the story is. I'm good now. I want to move on to the next story. But apparently that's not how this business works. Just kidding. And so anyway, I tend to spend forever on the very beginning of the book, because I wanted to be a pantser, right? Like I really wanted to be somebody who just kind of wrote and it just flew out of them. And it was just the most amazing thing. And I find out that sadly I am not. I actually need to plot, but not at the beginning, because at the beginning it's like everything is bright and shiny, and you know what I mean? And you just want to explore and see where it's going to go. So I usually sit down, and I usually spend forever. And this is something my editor is, because this is the second book I've done with my Crave editor now, and she's just learning about me, is I have to like write everything at the beginning, and it's how I enter the world, and it's how I enter the characters' heads, and it's how I learn about what it is the story is going to be. And that takes forever. And I write the first 3 to 5 chapters over and over and over and over and over again, even when they're like, can we see some more? And I'm like, yeah, no, it's coming. And I just do that until I feel like it's right. And then once it's right, I'm like, okay. And then I sit down and I write the rest of the book in, like, no matter how long it is, pretty much. I write the rest of the book in like 10 days. Sometimes shorter if it's a shorter book, but like, yeah. Usually my books run about 100,000 words. Crave is 160,000. They had to go for special paper to make it less heavy for kids in their backpacks. That was the concern. We didn't know COVID was coming, obviously. So that was the concern.
Sure they still appreciate it wherever they are. They're not straightening their wrist.
When we were going to print, was to make sure. And then it got to the point when we were going, because we were adding some stuff at the end. There's a couple like chapters from the hero's point of view, and there's some other stuff, and I really wanted to squeeze in another scene. And you have to go up at that point. When you go up by like 16 pages. And so my editor's like, okay, you've got 32 pages we can work with here if you want to. And I'm like, okay. And then she calls me back and she's like, nope, you've only got 16 because the printer ran out of paper. There's no more of that kind of paper. We can only do 16 pages. And I'm like, all right then, cut. So yeah, it tends to be down to the wire. Crave was certainly down to the wire, and I'm really hoping Crush will not be. But we did move up the publication date, so we'll see how it goes. But yeah, that's my process.
Crush sequel to Crave by Tracy Wolff, available in fine bookstores now. When will Crush be available?
Crush will be available September 29th. And it'll be
an esteemed audience. Mark, put that on your calendar.
Yeah, exactly. It was supposed to be April of 2021, but the momentum's been so great, and the fans have been so amazing and wonderful that and begging, because I left it on a cliffhanger, and kind of really begging for more, and I'm so appreciative of them. I said, okay, we can do this, and my editor was like, yeah, let's do it. So we decided to bring it out a little early. So we'll see how it goes.
I've got lots of questions for you about Crave, but I'd be kicking myself if we didn't go back and 10 days. Is Crave a 10-dayer after 5 chapters?
Crave spent a long time getting it on the front end, the first few chapters. In fact, I wrote I think it was 100 pages, and my editor's like, we need about 30 of these, so just take the other 70 out, which was really traumatic for me. I was like, but I love them so much. And she's like, life is hard. And which is true.
Harsh time. Who is this editor? Don't say her name.
And I tend to do structure backwards. I tend to really my first act tends to not be 10%. My first act tends to be 30%. And so then my editor's like, no, we're going to call that back. We're going to call that. So that's what we did. We called it back. And then she had planned on editing it at a certain time, but then we'd spent so much time on just getting to know each other, getting to know those first pages, that she then had to move on to some other editing projects. And so it kind of sat there. And then I wrote till the end in a couple weeks. And then it sat there for a couple of, she, had to do all her other work. And then when she got to it, she was like, okay, we need to do this to it. And I had to I had to rewrite, and I knew I was trying to keep it in. They'd asked for like a book about 100,000 words, and that's what I was trying to keep it at. And I knew there were scenes missing, but I was trying not to go too far over it. And so she came back, she said, no, these scenes are missing. You need to write them. And I was like, so, oh, yeah, I get to write them. And she's like, by the way, we need to write them like really fast. And so it was not a really, it was not a 2-weeker, but it was not a 6-monther. So, so there's that.
I'm in awe. I'm struggling with my 500 to 1,500 words a day. So what is 10 days a novel? What does your writing day look like at that point? Then when you're
right now, I'm doing Crush right now, and my writing day looks like before COVID, my writing day looked like getting up at 5 a.m., writing from 5 to 7:45, then getting the boys off to school and all of that. Coming back, usually writing another 3 to 4 hours, and then that would usually get me 7,000 to 8,000 words, and then trying to squeeze in 2,000 more wherever I could once school. And my mom lives with me, and so she's ill in general. She has a couple problems, and so there's always doctor's appointments in the afternoon, another thing, and then the kids and dinner, and the grind. So I'm then trying to squeeze in 1,000 to 2,000 words before bed is usually the goal.
And you're a full-time author, right?
I am now. Yeah, I have. I was a writing I was a writing professor part-time at the beginning. I had actually written my first book. I mean, I'd always wanted to. It's what I've always wanted to do. But I actually finally had time to write my first book when I was, well, we won't talk about how old I am, about 14 years ago. And that was because my second son was very premature, and he'd had really bad lungs. And the doctor had told me, we had moved from California to Austin for, at that time, my husband's job. And the doctor told me if I could keep my middle son home a year I had him in a babysitter in California. If I could keep him out of a babysitter, if I could keep him out of a daycare, we could probably get his lungs in better shape. And so, we just sold a house in California. So for the first time in our whole lives, we actually had a little bit of money where we weren't, because we met in grad school. We had a baby right away. That's
you didn't have all that sweet English professor money?
Yeah, all that sweet English professor money. Exactly. And he was a junior engineer. And yeah, so anyway, we said, okay, well, there's really no contest, right? Your kid's, life. So we're like, yeah. So I stayed home for a year, and I said, okay, I'm going to write my book. And I wrote 2 books that first year, actually, and they ended up becoming, my second one became my first book published, and my first became my second book published. And that's kind of how that went. I forgot what the question was. But
we were just talking about your process and how you get to a point where you can write a book in 10 days. Right. I'm fascinated. Yeah. Teach me to be more like you, Tracy Wolff.
And so then at that time, I was full-time then, and I used to write actually during the baby's nap times. Thank God, he was a prolific sleeper. He would sleep for 3 hours. So I would get him to sleep, and I would run up the stairs to my office, and I would write for 3 hours, and that's how my first 2 books got written.
That's
just in
a
those
gift
3
of
hours.
God. Wow.
Yeah, thank God. I know. My first one didn't sleep past him. When he was 6-month-old is when he gave up naps. So my first one was not like that at all. But my second one, oh, he was such a good sleeper. It was such a gift. And so that's how the first 2 books were written. And then I was still teaching, and I still taught part-time up until, I want to say 2014. I guess it would have been 2014, 2015, which is when I first hit the New York Times list and all of that. And then I went full-time, and I taught part-time mostly because, I wanted to keep my hand in it. I liked it. You never know how writing's going to go and what the market's going to look like and how your career is going to go. If there's one thing, this business, I'm sure it's taught you the same thing, right? I mean, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, and so you just have to be prepared for a lot of things. And so I didn't feel comfortable giving up teaching until around, I guess it would have been about 2015. And then I had filled in for a friend, I guess it would have been a year and a half ago when she'd gone on maternity leave. She said, could you fill in for me? And I was like, yeah, my kids are in school. That's no problem. So I went and filled in a couple classes for her and realized how much I missed it. And so I went back and started teaching. I think I took 2 classes a semester for a few semesters, and then this is the first semester I've had off. I think I taught 3 semesters, and then with Crave coming out, and we knew I was going to be traveling a lot, and I was like, I can't travel and be in a classroom, right? And of course, then COVID came along, and I was like, well, I'm just as glad I'm not trying to. I admire teachers who can teach online, and I like being in the classroom. Like, I love being with my students anyway. So I don't think I would have been great at it. So it turned out to be a blessing that I wasn't teaching this semester. So, and now that Crave is doing all of what it's doing, I don't think I'm going back for a while. So yeah, full-time writer. Long answer for a easy question. Full-time writer.
Oh, that's great. That makes my job incredibly easy, and we all learn more than we would have.
There is that.
as much as is comfortable for you. In fact, I had a couple of things I wanted to break down and ask. You know what? The heck with it. We've been talking a little bit about Crave, and I know Megan Beatty, previous guest, your publicist, who was kind enough to send me this book, is listening, and she's saying, okay, great. Are they going to talk about the book? Yes, we're going to talk about the book. So I don't do other people's biographies, and I don't summarize other people's books. How painful for you to listen to me do that. If you would, please give a esteemed audience just kind of an overview about what Crave is about, what they can look forward to.
Oh, absolutely. Crave is, if you look at the cover, it is kind of an homage to Twilight. It was kind of, vampire books were huge 10 years ago. And my editor really wanted to bring vampires back. And I'm a huge vampire book fan. I'm from a young age. I've loved vampires. I think The Lost Boys got me when I was really young, And so anyway, I've always wanted to do a vampire series. I always said I wasn't going to do it unless I came up with an idea that I thought was a little different, because there's been so many great ones done. You're walking in and I'm a romance novelist as well as a YA novelist, and I think like Christine Feehan does a really wonderful vampire story. Sherilyn Kenyon, of course, J.R. Ward. And then, of course, there's all the amazing YA writers and all the amazing horror writers. And I thought I wasn't going to jump into that unless I thought I could do it justice, And so it was kind of this perfect storm where Liz, really, that's my editor, really wanted to do a vampire series. And I was like, well, I have this idea, and I really wanted to do a boarding school book. I actually have 3 other boarding school books started on my laptop right now.
Completely unrelated series.
Yeah, completely unrelated to Crave, and none of them, I couldn't quite get them the way I wanted them to go. Like, one's actually a disaster story about a giant earthquake in California, which is where I was raised, and kids stuck at a boarding school and like the only 6 survivors of like the big one, right? And so I have other ones, and I just thought, well, no, I think this might be the story to do this boarding school at. And so the story is about a young girl named Grace. She's 17 years old. She's a senior in high school. Her parents have died in a terrible car accident. And she ends up having to go live with her only other living relatives, who she does know, but it's been a few years since she's seen them, her uncle and her cousin Macy. And they happen to live in Alaska, which I love fish out of water stories. I love I grew up in San Diego, which is where Grace is from. And I could just imagine, I can imagine now, because now I'm living in Austin, supplanting to Alaska, I'd probably have a stroke, right? I just know it. 17 years of age, I'd be like, but I can't wear my tank tops. What do you mean there's boots, not flip-flops? Where's the beach? And I mean, not that bratty, but, I really thought, what would it be like for this girl to have lost everything already and then have to, go to this really alien environment and start over. And then to find out that this alien environment is actually way stranger and way more different than she ever imagined. And so, of course, Grace gets to Alaska and starts going to school at this boarding school. And it doesn't take her very long, because the whole book actually takes place in 8 days. So it doesn't take her very long to figure out that something's wrong. But it takes her a couple days, right? Because, she's kind of numb and in a fog anyway, because her parents have died. And she's there and she's like, something's not right, but her brain doesn't immediately go to vampires, right? Her brain goes to aliens. Are you an alien? Like, what is going on here? I know something's wrong, but I don't know what it is. Somebody just figured, and then of course she finds out that the guy that she really likes is a vampire and her cousin is a witch, and the guy that she's becoming really good friends with is actually a dragon, and there's also the werewolves, and they're not very nice, or so she has found in her experience at Katmere, and it is a romance, a YA romance between Jackson and Grace, but it's also the trilogy itself is I think a very feminist story about this girl and actually two other generations of women that come in more in books 2 and 3, and how they fit into this world and how they learn to command their own power and take it in a world where it's kind of been denied to them too. So it's a little bit of everything.
So who's the ideal reader for Crave?
The ideal reader for Crave, it's a young adult, so they say girls 14 to 18, and I get letters from them every day, but I get letters from adult women as well. My romance readers have really embraced it as well, and so and I've gotten letters from several young men actually as well who really, really enjoyed it. So I say people who like vampires and people who like I said, I know Alaska's not urban. It's about the opposite of urban, but fantasy set in a modern world, right? More paranormal, but with definite fantasy elements. Like they live in a really cool castle that I love very much. Like I was like, okay, if I'm going to do a boarding school in Alaska, it's going to be a castle. I know that's not likely, but it's magic, so it can happen. So it's a big Gothic castle in Alaska.
Yeah, why not? Who's going to be like, oh, there's vampires, there's dragons, there's witches. We draw the line at castle. That's not believable.
Right? Exactly. That's what I said. Although one of the jokes my editor always says, she told me the other day again. She's like, I don't understand why it had to look like a brothel on the inside. I was like, have you met me? I was like, one, I love Gothic, right? And then I'm like, okay, I went full on Gothic with the black and the purple and red velvet chairs and black glass chandeliers. And I'm like, yeah, that's my vibe. So it looks like, everything that I love, and a spooky, scary set of tunnels underneath. That I had so much fun creating. Actually, they have have you ever been to Prague?
No.
There is this church called the Church of Bones in Prague, and it's an ossuary, and they have the most amazing bone chandelier, and it's human bones, right? Like the catacombs in France too, which if you've ever been through are scary as heck. But this gigantic bone chandelier that takes up a huge amount of the ceiling, and the first time I saw it, I was like, that has to go in a book someday. It just has to. I don't know what book, and this was many, many years ago. I don't know what book it's going to go in, but it's got to go in a book. And 65 books later, I found the book that it needed to go in.
Do you find yourself knowing that you've got this incredible amount of output in you? So I assume I'm talking to you about when we're through maybe the first fifth. So we can look forward to quite a few more books yet to come.
Hopefully you can look forward to more books, yes.
Are you kind of just forever taking snapshots of life around you, just tuck that away, I'm going to use that in a book someday?
I think I am, and I think I always have. I have one of my funniest stories is actually about the day I met one of my best friend's fathers, and we were in college. She was my college roommate. And I grew up in California, was born in Detroit, and had come to Texas for school because they had given me a full ride scholarship. And I knew I wanted to go to grad school, and, yeah. And so anyway, she took me home to her very small town in Texas. I think it was Easter weekend. I think it was. And so anyway, we get to town. Or we get to her little town, and her mom and dad say, hey, you want to go out to dinner? And we said, yeah, sure, we'll go out to dinner. So we get in the car, or in the truck, excuse me. We get in the truck, and I didn't realize, being from San Diego, that going to dinner meant you had to drive a solid hour and a half to get to somewhere where you could have dinner, right?
What?
Yeah.
That's
this small town, Texas. This town is 600 people, right? And her parents are I love them. They're the most delightful people, became my second parents, all of those things. But this is the first time we've met. And so anyway, we're like driving along, and then suddenly her dad like pulls the truck over to the side of the road. I'm 18. Jumps out of the car, and keep in mind this is in the 90s, and so it's a little different than like the climate now with the Second Amendment. And jumps out of the car, pulls a handgun. It's the first time I've seen a gun in person in my whole life. Out of the glove compartment, jumps out and starts shooting into this field, and I'm like, what is happening? Like, what is happening? Right? I just couldn't even imagine what could possibly be happening. And he gets back in the car and he says, well, there were a couple coyotes over there, and I just didn't want them to think I hadn't seen them. And I was like looking at it, and my best friend was like, what is happening? And she was just like, she's a country girl. She's like, yeah, that's totally reasonable. And I'm like, okay. Well, the funniest.
Were the coyotes potentially going to offend something on their land, or was this someone?
I don't know. Again, remember, we're going back 20 years, and things were different.
Just protecting all of Texas, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. and so anyway, I told her, I'm like, one day that's going to be in a book. It has not yet made it into a book, but one day it is. Well, the funny thing is, I fast forward many, many years, and when my husband and I had moved to Austin, we finally back in Texas for the first time in many years, and her parents had come up. She was living in Austin as well, and her parents had come for Thanksgiving, and I'm like, oh, let's like have your parents come over. I'd love to have them over for dinner Friday night, that kind of thing, because I haven't seen them in years. And they come over, and this is the first time they had met my husband or my children. And her dad starts to tell the same story, because he said he got back in the car and he looked in the rearview mirror and he says, all I saw were these eyes like this big peering back at me. So the irony is, it had the same impact on him that it had on me, but for very different reasons. Yeah. So anyway, one day that's going to be in a book, because he's the sweetest, most delightful man. And yeah, but that was total culture shock. So yes, I do. I collect.
Found now. You better put it in Crush, because now that you've said it on a podcast, it's somebody's book.
Somebody's put it in a book, right?
Story.
So yeah, I do. I collect moments, and all of my friends know that at any time something they say might very well show up in a book someday. It's just like hazard of the hazard of the profession. If you're friends with a writer, you got to know this is where it's going to end up someday. If it's really clever, I'm probably going to steal it. And then thank you in the acknowledgments.
And of course, friends are pretty good. Usually I find about always assuming that the villains are them or the heroes are them, depending on how they feel about themselves.
Oh my gosh, yes. They're like, that was me, right? Like, yeah, sure, of course it was.
I mean, I described them as incredibly beautiful, so obviously.
So obviously that was you. Obviously, no doubt at all.
So here's a fun question. If you're going to your boarding school and you've got to be a supernatural being, I know because I've been stalking you online and reading previous interviews that it probably wouldn't be a werewolf, because you're not completely.
They're not my people.
But what being could you envision yourself being?
Oh, I think I'd be a witch. I actually did an urban fantasy witch series. I actually did a dragon series earlier in my career under a different pen name, and I loved both. I was scared of vampires. I love them, but I was always scared to write them, like I said. But I've always loved witches and dragons. So I don't know, dragon, probably a witch. I think witches are fun.
But if you could be a dragon with witch-like powers, I mean.
Yeah. Right? Or witch who, transfigures into a dragon. Either way, I wouldn't kick that out of bed, right?
I'm just curious. You mentioned you had 3 other books at some state with boarding schools before this. What is it about a boarding school that attracted you that you wanted to write about one?
I don't know. I should probably have an answer to that question, and I'm not sure that I do. Well,
it might not be a fair question. Do you always know what attracts you to a story?
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, not always. Sometimes there's just something there, and I don't know. There's just something about a boarding school that I was a private school girl. I wasn't a boarding school girl, but I grew up in California and Los Angeles and San Diego, and so I'd gone to Catholic schools, and so the uniform was very familiar to me, and all of those things. But I wonder sometimes if it came. I had a very good friend of mine. I actually went to for most of my high school career, I went to a public school, and in San Diego. And I remember when one of my friends had gone off to Harvard. He came back, and he was older than I was, so he'd come back and he was visiting, and he was talking about when his video back in the day when they used to like send you the VHS tape. His video yearbook had come, and he was playing it for his friends at Harvard, and they were all like, "That's not a high school. That's 90210. That's like, what are you even talking about? Like, we went to high schools," and they had all gone to boarding schools, and they had all these boarding school stories. And I don't know. I think from that moment on, I've always been kind of fascinated by it. So maybe that was the kernel that kind of stuck in my head for, God, a lot of years.
And then I was also fascinated to read that you haven't been to Alaska.
I was supposed to be in Alaska right now. Can we just say that? I was doing a research. I was going to do a research trip for Crush and the third book, and I had planned it for, well, actually probably like 2 weeks ago at this point, and I was supposed to be in Alaska, and then COVID came along, and now I'm in Austin.
Well, sorry you didn't get to go. Hopefully, before you write 3, quarantine up there up a bit, and you'll have your chance to go out.
Hopefully, yeah. I had were you gonna ask why I had chosen Alaska?
I was just gonna ask how you did your research without going to Alaska.
This is the joy about.
So also, why did you choose Alaska?
This is the joy about being like the English professor, right? Like, I love research. It's one of my things. And so I actually made a comment because I had looked up something the other day, and I was like, I get why authors really needed big advances back in the day, because you had to have time to like spend forever going the places, doing the research, hours upon days upon weeks in libraries, answering all your questions. And now, Google's your best friend, right? So I'm like, what color is reptile blood? And reptile blood is orange. Oh, how cool is that? That's nice to know. Stuff like that. You just right there. And so anyway, I love to follow rabbit holes when I do research. And I remember, I think it was probably, God, it might have been the very first RWA conference I ever went to back in the day. And I went to hear Nora Roberts give a talk. And one of the things she had said she used to order, like, whatever part of the country she was setting a book in, she would order 15 or 20 books about that, that area. And she would just read them. And she would take notes and whatever else. And she said, the thing was 95% of the research didn't make it into the book, but it gave her a feel for whether it was North Carolina or whether it was Hawaii or whether it was Alaska or whatever it was. And I remember thinking that, and I tend to get a few books on an area, but now you just follow the rabbit holes. And I kind of go into it when I'm starting to look for a place to set. And when Alaska had come up to me, and I'll talk about how I'd come up with that in a minute, I just kind of start wandering through, and like thinking, and originally Crave was actually going to be set up in the tundra. I wanted to set it up in the northernmost town, which I cannot pronounce. It was called Barrow, Alaska for a lot of years, and then they've just recently changed it back to the Native Alaskan name. And it's a lot of syllables and a lot of letters, and I couldn't even pronounce it. And my editor was like, we can't set a book in a town that nobody can pronounce if it's going to be, so we've got to do something about that. Forks, for example, was very easy to pronounce. and I was like, she's like, also, she didn't think the tundra was as scary as I did. And this is, I think, where this is the difference between horror and terror, right? This is something my students and I talk about a lot because, like I said, the Gothic's my area. And she says, I don't think, the tundra's wide open. What's scary about that? I'm like, are you kidding me? You see something there, it's coming to get you. You can't do anything. You can't hide. You can't outrun it. Yeah, like, I think that is terrifying. She's like, well, what if they, like, jump out from behind, And I'm like, actually, nobody in Crave jumps out from behind anything. But, okay, so we ended up setting it further down south in near Denali, in, like, the deserted side. And that, interestingly enough, came from that when I said, okay, if I can't have Barrow, I want near Denali because I had watched The Art of Flight many years ago. Have you ever seen that documentary? It's a documentary on snowboarding many years ago, probably I guess they came out in 2014. I wrote a trilogy of snowboarding books. And like I said, I love research. And one of my greatest compliments ever on that series was a professional snowboarder had been like, I thought you were a snowboarder. I was like, how have I not heard of this snowboarder? And I'm like, yeah, I've never been on a snowboard in my life. I just think it's super fascinating. And so anyway, one of the many things I did was I watched this documentary called The Art of Flight. And the premise of that was they had gone to all of these really, really remote areas, places where nobody had ever snowboarded before. And they wanted to show you not just the snowboarding, but they wanted to show you really the beauty and the big views and the insanity of these areas. Like they were down in Patagonia, and like the most inaccessible area of Patagonia, for example. And then they were up in and the comment they had made about this area of Denali that they were in was that they had to get there from helicopter, and no human being had ever walked there, ever. And I thought, why would you not set a school in a place where no other human being had ever walked, right? And that's kind of where the nugget of it came from. And really, Alaska, though, in general, is an idea. My agent is great for locations. She's really good. She's I'm like, where should we set this? And she's like she named my dragons were desert dragons. I ended up setting them in New Mexico, and not a lot of people had done that at the time I did that. And it was her idea too. She's like, I just feel because I was thinking Maine, and she's like, no, desert. And they became these great New Mexico dragons. And she's like, Alaska, I just feel Alaska. And I'm like, well, let me poke around and see what happens. And I just fell in love. I fell down the rabbit hole, and I was just oh, I love it here. This is where my school needs to be. And the trauma of the really long winters and long, short days for the vampires is good. And then you worry about what that looks like in the summer. So we'll see. Book 3. We'll see how that goes.
Unimportant point of clarification. I actually have seen the art of the art of flying, the art of it was in 3D at the time. I think I recall. Completely unimportant, but I remember we had a 3D TV, and I was stupid enough to pay a stupid amount of money to watch snowboarders in 3D.
It was fascinating, though, right? Yeah, ridiculous. There's a lot of ridiculous stuff as they're shooting up propane tanks and all of that, and water skiing off a snowmobile. But yeah, some of it was really fascinating, though. So. Yeah.
Just a moment of terror. Someone will find out that I misspoke, and we better clarify it.
We better clarify that.
So how involved is your agent in creating and refining books early? I mean, are you talking from the moment you have an idea, just from those first 5 chapters before you go in, I assume, Tasmanian Devil writer mode to get the book done in 10 days? Are you talking back and forth about the ideas before, during?
She texted me 4 times today before this interview while I was washing groceries. I made my son text her back. I'm actually really incredibly blessed. It embarrasses her so much when I say this, but I had to chase her down to get her to be my agent. I don't know what it was about her. This is 15 years ago. She had just started her own agency. She had been training at Writer's House, and they had offered, they wanted her to come on as an agent. She decided she really wanted to start her own agency. She is the president of Prospect Agency, and it was a small boutique agency at the time. And I don't know, it's just everything about her appealed to me. And I'm like, this is my agent. She doesn't know it yet, but this is my agent. Her name is Emily Sylvan Kim, and she had just had a baby, and she wasn't really wanting to take on new clients. And I chased her down through 3 different conferences, and I got offers of representation from other agents, and I would call and be like, you know what, I've got this offer of representation, but I would really like to work with you. Can you please call me back? And nothing, right?
3 times you did this? Through I assume we're perfectly reasonable and decent agents.
Right? And they were perfectly. Yeah, they were perfectly great agents, and so I was like, okay, so finally I let 2 go, and finally on the 3rd one I was like, I'm gonna have to take this other agent if she doesn't call me back. And I was like, will you please call me back? Just let's have a conversation. And she called me back, and she says, and I just remember she's like, so I was up all night and I was thinking about it, and I decided, yeah, let's just do it. And that's how I got my agent. Nice. And we laugh to this day because she's become one of my and I know not all agents and clients have this relationship, but she's become one of my absolute closest friends. She actually sent me candy and Vermont cheese today to help with my writing, my push to finish crush.
Fantastic.
And she was like, if you're stuck, like, let me know and we can brainstorm. So she tends to be really big idea. Like, I had this idea once for this book. I wanted, in the height of, the Greek gods and paranormal, I wanted to do a modern retelling of a Pandora story. And I wanted it to be like food poisoning in the cafeteria, like opening like the crypt and like hanging out in one of the New Orleans cemeteries, voodoo, all of these things. And she's like, yeah, but she's like, I feel like that's been done. And she's like, you know what? She's like, I just wonder, what if we just do it differently? Now, even this was about 9 years ago. So what if we just do it a little differently? What if instead of opening a box, Pandora opens an attachment and she like starts this massive technological Armageddon? And that's just something my agent tossed out to me when we were on the phone.
And this is something that you've written, or are we giving another great idea away for free? Okay.
And I was like, oh my God, that's the best idea ever. And she's like, yeah, it kind of is. And then the first thing I did was I tried to give it away. I was like, you should let John, who was one of her writers who was big in like cyber books and that kind of thing, you should let John write that. I can't write that book. She's like, no, you're going to write me that book because you can do it. And that was at the same time that Stuxnet had come out and nobody knew who was responsible for it yet. Do you know what Stuxnet is?
Nope.
It's the blended threat that was conceived of under Bush and implemented under Obama to bring down the Iranian nuclear program. And it was half worm, half virus, and it was made partly by Microsoft, partly by the American government, a little bit by the Israeli government. But at the time, they had just found it because it did what blended threats do, and it had jumped. Like, it had very specific. It was working on a very, very narrow operating system that very few, systems ran on, and it had a kill date, and it had all of these other things. And it wasn't supposed to be able to jump. And of course it jumped, and they found it. A guy found it in Russia. And then suddenly it became this, this thing. And a friend of mine had given me an article on it. Rolling Stone had done an article on it at the time, and the American government had not claimed responsibility for it at that point. And but people who knew, what I mean, who understand how complicated this is, this blended threat knew that it had to come from somebody like Microsoft. It didn't come from a hacker. And so anyway, I just kept thinking about that in reference to what my agent had said. And then I created this virus, this blended threat that Stuxnet liked, that you could upload into a massive multiplayer online game. Like, I chose like the most popular in the world, hence the title. And now I haven't told you the title yet. And then it kind of spreads that way and it takes down everything. And it became this technological Armageddon that very quickly became like, if it takes down the lights, for example, it's one thing knowing that, the structure's there and we'll turn the lights back on. Kind of like where we are now. Like, food is still going. We know that this, you know what I mean? And eventually we'll be able to go outside again. It's another thing if it's gone and you don't know if it's coming back, right? That changes a lot of perspective. And so anyway, I did all this research on like what it would look like in a pandemic, and which is why when this started coming around, I'm like, oh, this is what's going to happen. And it was really interesting to watch because I had talked to all these experts 10 years ago about what would happen during a pandemic and how it would go and what would happen if these different things went wrong. And it was really interesting to see how so many of them were just right on about how it was going to go. And my family was like, oh my God, stop telling us, just stop telling us. Because like every night it was, oh yeah, this is what's going to happen next. Sure enough. And so anyway, it ended up becoming this book that was called Doomed, which was a shout out to the first massive multiplayer online game. And it was a book, for many, many years, I thought it was the best book I'd ever written. It was the hardest one. It took me 6 months because the research was so hard because I'm not a tech person at all. And I wanted to get it right. If you're going to do it, you got to do it right. And it ended up getting on a bunch of state reading lists. And the thing that I'm most proud of from the book is it's another really big book. It was 145,000 words. And it was named YALSA's best book for reluctant readers, even that big, the year it came out. And that was, as the English teacher in me, was like super proud of that one. Super proud. So anyway, she tends to do stuff like that. She'll tend to be like, so what if this just happened? And I'd be like, oh. And sometimes she's wrong. And sometimes, but like, 80% of the time after she says it, like I come back and I'm like, you know what? I think you were right. And then we just kind of, so yeah, she'll throw out like, I think it should be Alaska. And I'm like, no, not Alaska. And then I'm like, yeah, maybe Alaska. Like that.
What was it about Emily initially that made you bypass three other perfectly great literary agents?
Perfectly great agents for her. You know, I really loved that she had trained at Writer's House. This 15 years ago, and even today, Writer's House is an amazing agency. I really loved that. I loved that she was like me. She was young and hungry and ambitious, and wanted to, really wanted to make a name for her agency. I really wanted to, do something in the writing world, someday, right? And I really,
I think it's safe to say you've done something in the writing world. There's a lot more yet for you to do, but I think you can go ahead and lay claim to that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And so anyway, there was just a lot there. Her website at the time, I just really liked what her website looked like and what it said, and all. There was just everything about her just had the vibe that I wanted. And then I met her at a conference, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, I've been wanting to talk to you. I've been wanting, And then we were supposed to have a drink, and then it never happened. And I knew even then, like, I just really like her. And she's never done, like I always say, I've never brought her a book that she hasn't sold. And there are very few people who can say that about their agents. Like, I've never brought her a book she hasn't sold. So.
Pretty impressive.
Yeah. So I feel really blessed to have her. She's amazing. So.
You mentioned the pandemic. It occurs to me that I should definitely ask you about the old elephant in the room. It is, I always do this when we talk about COVID-19. We are recording this May 28th. Because, of course, this will come out a little bit later. So we don't know that aliens have landed or whatever news has occurred between now and when a esteemed audience is listening. But as of May 28th, having launched a book right in April, and obviously successfully, since they're moving up the release date of Crush, what was that experience, and what do you think you were able to do here in quarantine that Push Crave, or that your publisher was able to do, whoever the team was able to do that Push Crave to be a success despite everything, the world kind of falling apart around us?
It was interesting because we launched very early April, right? So we were one of the first ones to launch in the middle of it. So we were kind of inventing it as we went. You know what I mean? Now everybody knows, well, you do Zoom and you do this and you do that. I mean, my publisher had to go out and buy the professional grade of Zoom so that we could even do anything, because it was that new when we were planning at the very, very end of March, when we realized, yeah, everything we planned was out the window, right? So how are we going to fix this? And how are we, because, they had put a lot of money into advertising and other stuff. And I mean, obviously you want the book to do well. A lot of publishers just chose to move it. And so they ended up moving a lot of books to August and July. And they had decided, and I was in complete agreement that no, we were just gonna go, and we were gonna, even with the stores closed, when Barnes and Noble closed, it was a big hit to us. We thought, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? But we decided, no, we're gonna do this, and so we threw everything we could. Thank God, Target was amazing. A friend of mine had told me, people will go to Target even in a pandemic. And I said, I don't know if they will or not. She's like, they're going to go to Target in a pandemic. It's going to be okay. And everything that could go wrong kind of went wrong at the very beginning. Like the books didn't, because everything was such, if you think back 2 months, right? Things were nobody knew what was going on. Everybody's they were closing stuff down, and so books weren't getting from, on the shelves, even if they'd gotten them. Amazon had lost them, I think. I take that back. I don't know if it was Amazon. One of the places had lost it.
For the record, both Tracy Wolff and Robert Kent are huge fans of Amazon. God bless our corporate overlords.
Absolutely. Huge fan. But they were bringing in, everybody was scrambling for food and toilet paper and all of that. And so they had all of these shipments coming in, and the book, boxes get, in the middle of all that. And so where are they? And then they decided, at that point, they were going to pull back. They wanted to make sure people got food and the supplies that they needed. So they were going to pull back on shipping books. And we were like, oh my gosh, that means like all these pre-orders, like all, everything that could go wrong kind of went wrong at the very beginning. And my publisher is brilliant, Liz Pelletier from Entangled, and is the fastest thinker on her feet I've ever seen. And she just kept adjusting, and she just kept like rolling with the punches. She'd call me and she's like, I have good news and bad news. This is the bad news, but this is what we're going to do. So now it's good news. And okay, well, tell me what you want me to do. Tell me where you want me to go. Tell me what you want me to, and I will be there. And so then we had like, when we launched in the week, like we had, I think I had come up with, I wanted to do, we had sent a lot of books out to bloggers, and I had wanted to do a special blogger only, Bookstagrammer thing where they could, RSVP and they could come in and they were the only ones in. And I wanted to do that the day before the book launched. And we had a really, huge response to that. And they were so amazing and so welcoming and warm. And so many of them had read the book at that point and really liked it. And that helped, of course, a lot. And so I really enjoy talking to people. I'm one of the very few extroverted writers.
That works when you're doing 10-day novels away from the world.
It's hard.
Become an extrovert again.
Yeah, thank God there's a lot of people living in my house, so that helps. I can at least go see one of them. Hi, my friends know to check in on me. And so anyway, so we had done that, and so then we kind of invented like the rest of the week what we wanted to look like. Oh, okay, like we were going to do a launch interview on Tuesday, and then on Friday we put together a panel with 3 other really great writers who were launching sometime near me. And a couple of whose books had ended up being pushed out to the summer, and a few other things. And we just kind of like invented this whole what release week should look like in a pandemic. I'm not saying other people weren't scrambling and doing the exact same thing, but for us, we kind of felt like we were starting from scratch for us, and so we just kind of did what felt right. And yeah, I've been very blessed, and I have amazing fans and amazing bloggers who have taken me under their wing, and will always be intensely grateful for that. And so doing that in a pandemic was not the easiest thing. We were all, I think, a little nervous, and I think it's worked out well. I think we've done okay. So I'm really pleased. And we had, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. We had held the announcement. Universal had actually held the announcement of the movie deal until the day before Crave came out. And then we were so afraid that was going to get lost in the middle of like all the other pandemic news. Like there was a lot of stuff that had kind of gone into what the launch was supposed to look like, and then how it like ended up looking. But I think in the end, everybody from Universal to the video game to at Chapters to my publisher again just did such a brilliant job at just pivoting and figuring out how to do what needed to be done. So I was so grateful. All the way around.
Universal had a deal in place. What's going on with the video game?
The video game, I'm at Chapters Interactive, which is, I don't know if you know them. They are a kind of choose your own adventure type video game. They they have original content, and they also tend to buy books, and they create your whole world in this video game, and and then readers can go through and they can say, like, they get to this point in the book, like where the book is, because it's reading, and then they can choose to go like one way. Like they give them 3 ways, and one way is the actual book way, and the other 2 are different ways. And that was a lot of fun because I got to work on the script. Like my publisher was super adamant at the time that that it stay in my voice. And so I got to write I didn't have time to write the entire script because it's really exhaustive work. I have so much respect for video game script writers now. Oh my gosh. And we were turning it around really fast. And so, but I had to write, like, I got to write all the choices, right? And they had like the free choices, the diamond choices where people had to, pay or use their diamonds that they got from the game to go. And so I got to, all of that was my writing. And so I learned this new skill, which was incredible, of how to write a video game. And that was a lot of fun, and also a lot of work. I think more work than writing a book in some ways. So, so there's that.
That's outstanding. So how do you because you must You must have just an incredible focus, or have trained your mind to be able to sit down and get an 8,000 word day, a 10,000 word day, and then I assume you're reading on top of that. You're keeping up with all of your favorite series and everything else, right? So how much
Yeah.
time are you spending reading and writing on any given day?
Well, this is the thing, right? When you write a book you spend a couple months, right, fleshing it out at the beginning. Then you kind of write the main thrust of the book in 10 days. I'm not reading anything right now. I'm not watching anything. I'm not doing anything right now except writing and cooking for my family and talking to you. And but that's pretty much it. So on those days, and at one point I was putting out, this is how you get to 65 books, right? At one point I was putting out about 7 books a year. And that was mostly for Random House. It was for Random House and Little Brown and Entangled and Harlequin and Penguin, like different arrangements through there. But those were the publishers I was working with at the time. Through this probably 3 to 4 year period where I was doing, maybe 5 years, where I was doing 7 books a year. And that was hard because I was spending a lot of time, obviously. And it was one of those things where it was in rotation, where I had like the idea that I was pitching, and I had the book I was writing, I had the book I was editing, the book I was copy editing, and the book I was publicizing. And I had to do all 5 of those on any given week. And that was a lot. And so for me now, you say how much, like this seems like spending time on like one book at a time seems like, wow, or 2 books, right? I'm publicizing this book and I'm writing this book. That seems like I could do that. This is one of those things with my agent. If one talking, like maybe this is oversharing or whatever, but she's always helped me pivot. So several years ago, my husband had lost his job, right? And I went from being a good secondary income to having to be the only income. And I was, well, we got to do something because I have to make sure, because it trickles in, right? You never know really when you're going to get it. I'm sure like you have these royalty periods where they come. At that time, I think a lot of them were still 6 months out instead of every 3 months. So you're getting paid every 6 months. You never really know what you're going to get that 6 months.
On the children are hungry every day.
Right? Exactly. And because publishers aren't the same, where like at Amazon, if you self-pub, you can go in and say, oh, I've sold this many books. You don't get that, right? A lot of publishers, some publishers are more transparent. I've worked with really lovely editors, so for the most part, I have a general idea. So suddenly it was this. I had to work, and I had to make sure that I had everything covered and all of that, and so it became this thing where 5. So now when I'm like, okay, I've got 2. I feel like, okay, I can read a book. I can watch, binge watch a TV show when I'm not in the middle of writing. I can do that and still feel like I'm doing okay on the editing and the all the other things. So baptism by fire, I guess you call that.
I'm both exhausted and deeply admiring.
It was a lot.
Tracy, I'm watching our time flying by, and I know you've got sick boys to go and prepare chicken soup for, so I won't keep you long. Esteemed audience knows I have to ask, and I want to ask. Tracy Wolff, have you ever seen a flying saucer, and do you believe in them?
I absolutely, positively believe in flying saucers, and I have never seen one, but I'm not discounting the chance that one day I might.
And then you're going to write a book about probably a romance between an Earthling and an alien, and it'll be
maybe. I actually have a YA or a middle grade that I was actually before I started on Crave, and so it's kind of been tabled for now. A middle grade that I call Calico Jack and the Amazing Mostly True Tales from the Andromeda Galaxy, and he is a middle grade space pirate. And one day I would really, really love to write that series, and we'll see if that ever happens. But I love outer space. I never wanted to go. Like, I'm too much of a chicken. But hi, kitty.
That's Mabel. Mabel always makes a guest appearance.
Right. My dog is locked out of the room at the moment. But because she will just come climb right on the laptop. She thinks she's a lap dog, and she's actually like a 60-pound Kelpie. So. I
used to lock her up but put her in a in the room with her cat box, her toys, her food. She's fine, esteemed audience. But esteemed audience looks forward to seeing her, so now I just let her run around.
Yeah,
get her cameo in. Tracy, I've enjoyed talking to you, and I know I've run right through our time. So I'm going to end with this, because I always end with some variation of this final question, because it's a good way to catch all the things I might have gotten you to say if I'd just been smart enough to ask better questions. But my last question is always some variation of, if you could go back, 2006, 2005, when you're really getting cooking on starting to write. And give yourself some advice that would have made a significant amount of difference and maybe make things easier for you, or maybe several pieces of advice. What would you go back and tell yourself, and what would you want all the potential authors listening now to know?
I think I said it actually already early on in the show, that it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. You feel like, I think you spend so much time like thinking about writing your first book and then getting your first book published, like getting the agent, like all of those things, that when it happens, or at least for me, I wanted to like race, you know what I mean? I'm like, well, I want to get another contract. I want to, I was writing for Harlequin and Penguin at the time, and I wanted to do that, and I wanted to just keep publishing books, and I wanted to write a lot of different things and all of that. And I think that my advice is explore everything you want to write. But I think that there's time too. You know what I mean? I think that sometimes that my career might have been less rocky. I mean, I've had a really beautiful career, and I'm very grateful for it, and I'm very proud of it. But I also kind of deviated very quickly at the beginning. I was writing sweet romances for Harlequin and super sexy romances for Penguin, and your audiences didn't cross over. So I didn't know, and I was so new to the business, I didn't understand that what I really needed to work on was building an audience that would you know what I mean, follow me, then like really get them cemented here. And I think that don't rush. Understand that it's a marathon. Understand that there are going to be ups and downs. There are going to be years where things are going really well, and there are going to be years where things are going really badly. That is the nature of the business and the nature of the career that you have chosen, I think, as a novelist. And I think that anybody who's been in this business long enough figures that out. You know, I had done a virtual book signing for Mysterious Galaxy several weeks ago, and they were my hometown San Diego bookstore many, many moons ago. So it's always a thrill for me to sign there. And so anyway, they talked about, she'd been looking back at the first time I'd signed for them. It was on a book that had come out in 2011. And she was like, you know, I realized there aren't a ton of authors who've been doing that, doing this consistently for as many years as you have. I mean, obviously there are very big names who were doing it consistently, but for most of my career, so not all of it, but for a significant portion of my career, I've been pretty solid mid-list, right? And it's just always been putting one foot in front of the other, and all of that, knowing that you never know what book's going to be Crave, or what book is going to, be in the case of 2015, it was Ethan Frost and a book called Drive Me Crazy, which was the sequel to Crash Into Me, which I think you had asked about originally in questions, that had first put me on the list and really helped me build a very broad audience. And I think that if I had given up early, my first book came out in 2008. So I think if I had given up before I ever got to 2015, if I hadn't kept writing that next book and trying that next thing and understanding that it wasn't an overnight success, that I think I never would have gotten there. You know what I mean? So I say just understand that if this is the career you want. Oh, and I'm sorry, I'm just gonna, one more piece of advice I got.
We can't get it up.
Do you know Jonathan Mayberry?
Yes.
He is a brilliant and amazing and lovely human being. And I met him many years ago at a conference for the first time. And he was talking about the fact that you could be a working writer and you could support yourself as a working writer without being a massive bestseller, but you had to be open. You couldn't be, I only want to write this project, I only want to do this thing. And then not very long ago, a couple weeks ago, I was being interviewed by somebody I've known in the industry a very long time by the name of Molly O'Keefe. And she said, your career has kind of been She says, for a long time, she says, all of us are thrilled to see how well Crave is doing. You were for a long time the hardest working woman, we used to say, and whatever. And I said, well, I don't know if that's true. She says, but, she'd gone on, she said, your career's always been about, like, the power of saying yes. Like, oh, sure, you build, I'm blessed. I've worked with really lovely people who have taken really good care of me, including the publisher that I'm with now, Liz Pelletier, who was the publisher for me way back when with Crash Into Me and Drive Me Crazy, the first book to get me on a list. And so anyway, I've been really lucky to surround myself with really great people who have been wonderful to me. But also when they do something like say, hey, I really want to bring vampires back. What do you think about that? I think I've got this great vampire idea. Why don't we try it? So I think you have to be open. You have to understand if you want to be in it for the long haul, you got to be open. You got to adjust. You got to pivot, and just hang on there because good things are coming. You just gotta work for them and wait for them and be lucky. It's all right. It's a little bit of everything. That's what career is. That's my advice. It's kind of convoluted and whatever, but that's my advice. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. So just remember that.
Is excellent advice and an excellent note to end on. Tracy, this has been a privilege and a pleasure. We'll have to do it again when Crush comes out. This was a wonderful evening, and I appreciate you making the time tonight.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been a real pleasure. I really enjoyed speaking with you. Thank you for having me.
Come back anytime. This is I feel like we've just scratched the surface of all the writing advice that you have to offer, esteemed audience. Where can the esteemed audience find you online, stalk you on social media, and all that good stuff?
At Tracy Wolff Books is my, you can do that on Facebook or Instagram. I'm Tracy Wolff Author is my website. And Twitter is Tracy Wolff. So, yeah, Tracy Wolff. You can find me at Tracy Wolff.
Google Tracy Wolff and Crave. You're going to get, I think I got at least 7 pages of Google results before with somebody else. So you'll be set esteemed audience. As always, keep up with me and the show at middlegradeninja.com. Download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees and the Book of David Chapter 1. I'm God willing and I'm alive. I will see you next week.